I'm Cierra Bettens. Welcome to APTN News InFocus. This episode, we continue our conversation with veteran journalist and outgoing APTN web reporter, Kathleen Martens. We'll learn more about what 35 years in journalism has taught her, and how emerging reporters can build trust and navigate this ever-changing but always exciting industry. Here's that conversation. You've told hundreds of stories for APTN. Are there any stories over these past 15 years that really stand out to you or really taught you something important?
It's hard to answer because there have been so many. I tried to show and reflect that the issues that are happening in mainstream media also affect Indigenous peoples. I think this is a problem within the media and in society in general that, we typecast people and we think, oh, well, they're just kind of one-dimensional, right? They go to powwows, they sew their ribbon skirts, when someone in the community is killed, they have their vigil. We all know that's not the case, especially now, but that was how it was covered in the past, just like a one-off. And so one thing is always connected to another in Indigenous communities. We've learned about intergenerational trauma. So when you're in court and you're covering a case, you hear the accused is a residential school survivor or the victim. And then you hear they're in active addiction. And you hear their community is affected by the opioid epidemic. All of these things are connected. And it's not a lot of leaps. That, like when I first came, I thought, how am I going to learn everything? These are cultures that go back thousands of years, right? And yet it really, we don't even report on anything that happened pre-contact. We report on the impact of colonialism going forward. And so everything that's connected is from contact and the harms and the attempts at, control, the Indian Act, creation of reserves. These are all structures set up by governments, colonial governments, and then those structures themselves created problems. And Indigenous peoples, especially First Nations peoples, have always found a way to either challenge it in court or, direct their people not to do things a certain way, because that's not our way, that's not our culture, that's not who we are. And I have learned you can't pigeonhole them, you can't typecast them. Intelligent, vibrant, very good at sort of sidestepping the things that we believe they are, or we think they should be. They are not that, and they never will be. And they are always kind of one step ahead of us or finding a way to get around us. I say us, as a non-Indigenous person. And so I have a lot of friends who ask me, what it's like to work at APTN. I mean, I work with Indigenous peoples. I work for Indigenous peoples. And I love it. And it has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And I don't know that I can really pick a particular story. I mean, I certainly like stories that involve a huge injustice, that affect a lot of people, that cause harm, and that can clearly illustrate for every audience that what is happening, even if it happened in a non-Indigenous community, is wrong. This is not a special wrong. This is just wrong. And how is society going to deal with it? How is it going to be punished? How is it going to be corrected? And that's the other big part of the story we do. A lot of the issues perpetuate because society is not willing to deal with them and address them. Even reconciliation has fallen off the map, right? So will the next 15 years be the same kind of stories or different? I don't know. I hope that they will be more positive. I'll keep an eye on APTN and see.
I have a kind of more existential type question, but I'm wondering, what does trust in a journalistic sense mean to you, and how have you built that with your sources over the years? And, has your method of building trust changed when you started at APTN?
I would say yes. I have always known how to cultivate sources. I have relationships with sources for years. I've even had to break up with some sources because, things didn't work out. Pass them on to other reporters because our relationship would get rocky and they're a good source. My approach didn't change, but the way we communicate and care for each other changed. So most sources, they just message you and say, here's, just give you the information. But I find with some of my First Nation sources, it's good morning. How are you? How are you feeling? What have you been doing? And then we get to the information. There's like the niceties to, I think, remind me that I'm dealing with a human being and one who is giving me a gift of information. Just the way the exchange is handled is a bit different. And if I'm in a hurry and I don't have time for the niceties, which is often, I will circle back when I can to acknowledge that I didn't have time then, but I'm doing it now. And that's a trust too. That's part of the trust because they don't have to talk to me. Trust is everything. We can't do any story without trust. We're viewed suspiciously, especially if we're non-Indigenous. Got to work extra hard to create that trust. And they are not shy to tell you when the story comes out what they did or didn't like it, or maybe they loved it and wish you went harder. And you were like, oh, I was just trying to be careful there. So, I always protect my journalism. I'm always honest with sources that I'm a journalist first. That's the reason I'm calling them. I'm not calling them because I like them as a person or I think we could be friends. I try to be very honest with them about that. And when they call me and tell me something, I say, is this information I can use for a story? I have to be clear and remind them because sometimes they let down their guards and share things. And then when I say, okay, when can we do the interview or who should I speak to? They sometimes are hurt because they feel we have a relationship of trust. We do, but I have that relationship because I want information. And that can come across as cold and hurtful, but I have to do that. I have to have that professional boundary. That protects me and it protects them. So trust has been, it's everything. And I tell the people that, like, I appreciate when they trust me. I thank them for trusting me. But in the end, that's what it is. Once I have the information, it's with me to do my story. And at that point, they're out of that part of the making the story. And then when it comes out, I have to trust that they will appreciate it. But I don't do it for them. That's the other thing I've had to teach sources. I'm not doing the story for you. I do the story for the public at large. That big blob out there, that I don't do it for you. It's not to please you or make you look good. And that was a bit of a learning curve for sources too. But it's all part of the trust relationship. In any relationship, even when you have personal relationships, friendships, intimate relationships, it's about communicating and not taking that trust for granted. And when you violate that trust, you have to apologize and make up for it. I try not to do that. I have so far been okay in not doing it, but because we tell some very sensitive stories, right, that involve suicide, incest, other, very serious crimes, people are vulnerable when they talk to us. They open themselves up, and so they can be easily hurt. And trust is all a part of that. So I would just tell reporters it's everything. And if you don't have it, it hurts your reputation at large. I've had people call me and say, are you Indigenous? And I say no. Well, I want to talk to an Indigenous reporter. Fair enough. I offer the story. Sometimes no one takes it. So I call back. I say, no one was available. I can still do it. No. And that's their right. These are just tipsters. But sometimes they'll talk to others who will say, you can trust her. And so that sometimes makes up for my lack of indigeneity.
Mm-hmm. And so kind of going back to our conversation earlier, just talking about the start of your career in journalism, I'm wondering, how have you witnessed the industry change from then to now, or perhaps even in some ways stay the same?
I've noticed a lot of changes in society. It's become more about the individual than the community. Particularly noticed that during the pandemic. And that's the stories I see are usually someone complaining about something. And this is in mainstream too, where someone says, oh, my flight was late and the airline wouldn't reimburse me. Before, people wouldn't call the media and complain about that. But now they do. I look through my feed and I see that I've set up online of news stories that I'm interested in. It's almost all generated by like individual complaints or problems. Whereas before it was different. It was more a community or a family or a system. And so that's different. And also reporters are different, right? They're from different generations and that all have names like Y and Z and A and B. And so they bring their perspective and their news judgment. So something to me that is obviously a story, because that's what we've always done a story on, they're questioning that, saying, why are we doing that story? And at first it was like kind of like a slap in the face to me. And then I thought, yeah, okay, different people, different approach. It can cause some conflict, but it's depending on the audience too. Our audience is almost all digital, and they're very savvy. They do their own TikTok and Instagram. They take pictures, they take videos. I mean, look how many stories we get now, which never happened before, because of a video or photos or somebody was recorded surreptitiously. People now have these tools. We can benefit from that. Plus social media, so many tips, so much information, just widely, freely shared on Twitter, especially on Facebook. I would say maybe 50% of my stories are generated from Facebook. And if I want to reach an Indigenous person in Canada, I have to have Facebook. And they've got their own networks. Their communities have their own Facebook pages. If you're a group, right, I follow Inuit hunting stories. Fascinating. How they, if somebody shoots a polar bear, if somebody, and it's there. Communities have their own events and they comment on them, and sometimes those are stories for us. So that's definitely how it's changed. It's how that level of information, those tips reach us, and how we communicate with people. Sometimes it's in a messenger interview. Sometimes it's in a FaceTime. We have a lot more ways to get a hold of people. Where when I started, right, there was the phone book. And I once had to call every Smith in Winnipeg to find the right family. We don't have to do that now. And, Indigenous peoples, they're our world at APTN. We covered that world, but they're a very small percentage of the Canadian population. So if you know 1 or 10 of them and you're trying to find somebody, someone will help you find that person. And that's a cool element, right? I can message a few people and say, do you know this person? Can you find out who they are? Can you get me a number? And it doesn't even take a day, and I'm usually talking to them. So that has changed. I would say access and speed and just the types of stories, what people are interested in is a bit different. I mean, we never report on the deficit anymore, or things like that. Like, no, it's more about how the politician was talking, or were there Indigenous people in the room, right? So it's definitely evolved with how society has changed. But I would just say access is incredible. The speed at which we can get information and disseminate it. We can now at APTN put it on our website before we can get it on our news at noon or at 5, right? Go to the web. We're all over social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads. We're all on there. So if we hear something, bang, we're on those social media platforms. So we turn it around and we get it out there very fast. And so when you say, I've got a story, suddenly you're looking at feeding, 10 platforms and having to get it in various treatments, but you can get it to a wide audience. And we have an app. When Facebook turned off news, everyone's like, how are we going to get our news? And we're scratching our heads going, wait a minute, we have a webpage. It was almost like old news, right? So we're like, okay, let's get people to come back to our webpage. And so those are definitely the changes I've seen. And reporters who question now what we've always done and should we keep doing it. That has been very educational for me and interesting. I will see how they turned it around, and I'll say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way only because I'm not them. But the way they did it got the 5 W's and got it out there, and it was a good story.
Mm-hmm. So I want to end on, you're currently wrapping up a decades-long career in journalism. I'm just starting mine, and I'm wondering, what advice do you have for emerging journalists, with this ever-changing but also ever-exciting environment?
Well, I kind of had to think about that because I wrote a little farewell note on my LinkedIn page, and I thought, how do you boil this down into a few words? And I realized, it was leading with integrity, surrounding yourself with good people, and trusting yourself. It really comes down to you, who you are as a person, what you want to accomplish, what you want to achieve in this job, right? So that every day when you sit down to pick up the phone, to write those words, to face the camera, you are being true to yourself and your mission, so to speak. I try to set an intention every day when I work. I think, I can shut out a lot of things, mainstream. I've got my APTN blinders on. I've got my reporter armor on because unfortunately in society, some people are very mean and unpleasant, and we are targets, and that's been getting worse. And also has not only are we being cut off access to information by people who don't like us or don't want to talk to us, but we're being denigrated, which that's fine. You don't want to talk to us, don't talk to us. But then they put us down and they spin who we are and what we represent, and they attack us personally, which I find highly offensive because they don't know me. I'm doing my job with integrity. I put my name on every story I write. I face the public daily. And frankly, that kind of way of interacting with the world takes guts today. And so I would say, open your mind, keep your mind open, close your heart so it doesn't get hurt. To remind yourself, I'm there as a reporter. They don't know me personally. Try not to take it personally. But most people who come to the industry are there because they want to right a wrong. They want to tell stories. They want to share information. Very quickly, we can see if it's someone who just wants to be on television and see that they just won't have what it takes. They won't have the stick-to-itiveness that it needs. It's a commitment to get up every day and enjoy that it's something different every day, but to still deliver your work in a consistent way. Reliable, fair, accurate, balanced. People will recognize that in your work, that you are taking it seriously and doing the best you can, being fair, trying to give everybody a voice. And I hope that will still be recognized and valued going forward. I have had the pleasure of that happening for me throughout my career. And even now as I'm leaving, I have a good reputation. A lot of my work is respected. And that is how I'm going out of the industry, and I'm proud of that. And I worked hard to achieve that. And my advice would be, it's not complicated. Just do your best and be sure that you protect yourself now and you have a strategy for coping. It used to be, the stereotype of us hard drinking, hard living, hard smoking, dealing with the stresses. That's not acceptable anymore. It's harmful to you and others in your life and to your work. So find ways to cope with the stress because it's there, it's a fact. And, just be true to yourself and to the stories that you're telling.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And wishing you all the best in this next chapter of your life.
Thank you so much. It's been somewhat cathartic to
Yeah.
talk about it. So
Yeah,
thanks
sure.
for the free therapy.
Anytime. That's all for today. If you want to see some of Kathleen's work from over the past 15 years, visit aptnnews.ca and check out the Our Relatives podcast wherever you listen. Today's episode was produced by Mark Blackburn and edited by Jesse Andrushko. Charmaine Straker is the executive producer of APTN News InFocus. I'm Cierra Bettens. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, one of the hosts of APTN National News. We've expanded our Truth and Politics panel into a weekly podcast. Each episode, panelists Jennifer Leywitz and Negon Sinclair join us to examine key issues affecting Indigenous peoples across Canada. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast player.